I'm Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield.
I'm Kate Walton-Elliott.
And this is a very small car. It's the MINI Cooper S.E. And we're going to take it for a little spin.
Hang on a minute, lads. I've got a great idea.
I love the fact that this has a really tight turning circle and such a responsive steering. Sometimes a little bit too responsive.
Yeah, it can feel a little twitchy at speed, particularly in like twisty, narrow roads, but it's not bad. It's just quite sharp.
But it tells you where the wheels are at all times. You've got feedback, which is something that a surprisingly large number of car companies don't seem to be able to do anymore.
Yeah, it's bizarre how many car companies manage to produce vehicles where it feels like you're holding a dead fish.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me very sad. As someone who actually really enjoys driving, having a car where you don't have that road feel, it's like having a sense taken away from you.
Well, it also makes going around corners extremely difficult because you don't know, for example, how much am I feeding the steering? How much do I need to tuck in? How much throttle can I get away with? All of those are things that you feel both through the steering wheel and through your bum because of the chassis. And if the chassis is tuned right, you should be able to feel in your buttocks how fast is safe around a corner. You should be able to feel when the tyres are about to lose grip. You should be able to tell if your steering is not quite set up right. And I feel like this car manages all of those extremely well. I think part of that is because the seat hugs you so nicely, but it's also, I think, just really well put together. The whole experience just feels right.
It does, and actually maybe that's why it survived so long, because let's be fair, 2014 is when this car, the chassis and the body of this vehicle were basically designed. That was the last real complete design refresh for this vehicle. And that is a long time in car history.
Yeah, 8 years is, getting ready for retirement.
And to be fair, it is getting ready for retirement, but for it to still feel as good as it does when it drives really speaks to how well they set it up originally. Acceleration in traffic is something that this car doesn't faff around with. It's not the most, gut-wrenching acceleration. You're talking about 6.9 seconds to 60 miles an hour or 7 and a bit for 100 kilometers per hour, but it's enough to get you out of trouble. The power to rate ratio of this car, I don't know it, I don't have it on the top of my head, but it feels well sorted. This year we've driven several cars that have felt underpowered for their weight. The Bolt EUV felt a little sluggish because of the way the throttle was mapped, because of the way that the vehicle was heavier than the original Bolt, but still had the same battery pack and drivetrain. This feels like a very well-matched car. And you made a comment to me earlier off camera that I think is worth noting here. This car is steel. Yeah.
It doesn't have aluminium panels. It doesn't have lightweight carbon fiber components or carbon fiber reinforced plastic like the original i3 did. I suspect that is why this is potentially a little more reserved than the original i3. If you knew your i3 well enough, you could really throw it around.
Yeah, it was absolutely a complete little go-kart. Just enormous fun.
There are hints of that in this car's DNA. There are like little glimpses of it here and there. But I think that extra weight of the body and everything else, the fact that it doesn't have the best coefficient of drag, 0.3 is not good by today's modern standards, unless you're comparing it to, say, a pickup truck. And that does, I think, influence how this car handles. But you know what? The interior noise of this car, the sound deadening, everything else is very good. There's something rattling right now, but it's not actually in the car. It's the camera behind me that's rattling. And it just feels very nicely executed and very comfortable and very nice to be in. I don't think I'd want to be in the back right now. There's a very minimal headroom. I know that my head basically touches the roof when I'm back there. But for two people, I think this could actually be a very comfortable vehicle. I've got my legs kind of stretched out. And I think on a little tiny road like we're about to go on, this really comes into its own.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I agree with you. I think those back seats are there for, just occasional use, mainly use when, I don't know, you're not going any great distance. And it's so well thought out, but that bit feels a little bit lackluster. So as long as you don't need them, then you can have these seats back a little bit further. You can get a bit more space up front, and then it feels like a cocoon. It's snug, which doesn't tie in with the original Mini at all, but does tie in with the way that the Mini as a brand has set itself up. It's set itself up as a performance-y oriented, luxury-ish premium brand, and this feel of the cabin, it feels like Mini has since it was relaunched.
You know what I think I would love to see, and I don't know if anybody watching this has the money to make it happen. I would love to see a Mini E race league. That's because I think this car has everything it needs to become an official race series. It's got great regenerative braking, the steering is direct and responsive, the chassis is very well set up. We're not speeding up this hill, but we're definitely giving it plenty to do. And we're coming up here at the kind of speed that I used to come up here in my Chevrolet Bolt. I know my Bolt very well, or knew my Bolt very well. I suspect that you drive this road in your Kia at a similar kind of speed.
Yeah, I drive this road in my car sometimes when I come down to film, and it's a very difficult road for me to drive gently. I absolutely swore today that I was going to come up here gently. I stuck the car in eco mode, and I still came up here reasonably quickly because I know it, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is Rocky Point Road in Oregon. It's a way for you to get from Washington to me on the west side of Portland without going through Portland, and it's a great little cut through. And if you like driving, it's a great road. It's a great road for motorcyclists, it's a great road for cyclists. It's very popular and very busy. And normally when you do a trip like this up this road in anything large like my pickup truck, it's uncomfortable. It's possible to do, but you're having to mind the car at every opportunity because the road is very twisty and the road is quite narrow. In a car as narrow as the MINI SE, it's really not a problem at all. And getting up this road, even with a limited battery pack, is fun. And that's something that I keep coming back to again and again and again with this car. The experiences that you have behind the wheel in this car make you smile at every corner. And look, this is a hairpin turn, and it just feels right to come through here. Pushing the car, giving the car plenty of beans, and the car just says yes and.
Yeah, it does, so much so. And there is something to be very much said for cars that are fun at lower speeds. Because the Mini, ever since it has existed, has been enormously good fun at, you can have fun in a Mini at 20 miles an hour. You can have fun in a Mini at 30 miles an hour. And this will go adequately quickly. It will take you down the freeway. It will do what you need it to do, so long as it's not terribly far away. But it will do it, and it will give you a smile every time it does. And that is part of its heritage.
I think, though, that something that Mini needs to address, something that BMW needs to address, is that range estimate. We know that clearly BMW Mini went into a lab and tested the range and gave a very, very kind of technical performance of city driving, which is what the test asks for. But in the real world, when you've got 181 horsepower, 135 kilowatts, under your right foot and you've got something this small and this nimble and this responsive and agile, you're not gonna drive it like you're doing a shopping run. And I think if you are, this is probably not the car for you. This is a car that's why I think it would make a great track day car, because 100 and some miles, or, you know, let's be generous and say 65 to 70 if you're really hammering it round a course like, I don't know, Laguna Seca, WeatherTech Raceway, really pushing the car, really putting in some good numbers with some super slick tyres on, you're going to get a much reduced range. But if you put this on a back of a trailer and you tow it there with your Ford F-150 Lightning or your Hummer EV or your Cybertruck or whatever you are towing with, you could actually have a legitimate zero-emission track day vehicle.
And it is just so well dialed in. I can see it really performing well on a track, although, as you say, you're going to be limited in your range. But does that matter? Does that matter for that use? No, it does not.
Autocrossing would be another great example of this car. Short wheelbase, super tight turning circle, very nimble, great acceleration, great regen. Again, I'd love to see this autocrossed, and I'm sure that there are people who own this car who do autocross it, and if you do, please let us know in the comments below, because I'd love to come and watch you do it, or maybe even have a go myself. But you know, if something like the Ford Mustang Mach-E can autocross, I know this one can. So one thing I think that it's good to notice here, Kate, is that you were driving in regular mode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've just put it in sport mode, so let's see how we go here. No, the actual, you know, the handling of this thing is just glorious, how you can just throw it around corners. And it just does give you that kind of more, please. I think this is a car you could probably lose your license with.
Yeah, you could. It doesn't have a terribly high top speed, and as we said, not a long range, but it does have a yes, I can do that, and which at least several of the cars that we've had recently have been a grudging acceptance of a desire to drive quickly or to drive with spirit, whereas this is a vehicle that you really, it eggs you on, which is not necessarily a good thing.
I mean, it's egging me on right now.
Yeah, I can feel that.
A 50 miles an hour around a corner is quite crazy, and I should point out here I'm actually I can actually two-pedal drive this car, which is bonkers. The fact that I can use both my feet, you can heel toe this car and it responds, which is lovely. And it doesn't feel like it's being asked to do too much. Because of the head-up display, I can see very clearly what's going on in front of me. I don't have any concerns about not knowing what the speed limit is or how fast I'm going. This head-up display is really clear and very easy to follow, and it just feels like this car has just been very well sorted. But look at this. I want you to consider, watch what my hands are doing here, right? Halfway round and I got a 90-degree turn. This is why I think this is a great race car, because that would be a very sharp hairpin turn on a racetrack, and I didn't have to move my hands at all.
You didn't. You did that, and it handled it. It stayed fairly flat as well. There's not a lot of roll in this car.
Very little roll, and that's partly because it's a Mini and it's low down to the ground. Obviously, it's got great centre of gravity because of that battery pack. It just holds everything really well. The steering wheel is just the right size. It's not too big, it's not too small, and there's not a lot of extra buttons and complications on the steering wheel. I think that's partly because, you know, I could reach over and touch that door if I wanted to. It's small enough that you don't have to have so many buttons on the steering wheel because everything is literally within easy reach.
Yeah, I mean, it is the 2CV central locking. You can sit and reach all the other doors.
Well, the other door.
The other door, yes.
4-door, though, fills me with a little dread, because I think if they made a 4-door version of the Mini E based on this frame, you wouldn't be able to easily get in and out of the front seat, and I think rear seat passengers would just find that rear door would just be very, very restrictive. getting into the back is actually easier in this car with just 2 doors than it was in the MX-30 with those suicide doors at the rear. And I think that was a very smart move on Mini's part here.
Well, I think what we'll see when they launch the refreshed version is something like the Mini All-4, which is a bit bigger all around, and really it is gonna, I hate to say it, it's probably gonna be a CUV. It probably is, and I will be sad, but not entirely surprised. And this is something that we get a lot as these cars are being refreshed, is that the smallest form factors are disappearing, particularly in the US. And I think that's a shame, because I would love this as a dedicated platform with a slightly bigger battery. It doesn't have to be much, but slightly bigger, and just making better use of the flat floor that you can get with the electric platform. And so, frankly, this car has a massive tunnel down the middle for the exhaust, which is there for the gasoline version. And that isn't even the case in the original Mini. The original Mini has a nearly flat floor. And so the idea of re-engineering this to give you a bit more of that interior space, move the motor a bit further forwards, just get it a little bit closer to the original Mini's ethos, while at the same time keeping that enormously good fun 4 wheels at the corner. It's just going to be epic.
It really is. And I would love this as it currently stands. If it was 25 grand, it would be a really good car for 25 grand, especially with inflation as it is right now. So this is 10 grand cheaper. I would actually be actively recommending people buy this if they only needed 100 miles, and most people only need 100 miles. Charging, obviously, you could overnight charge it. You can charge it at a push at a rapid charging station. But because of that 50 kilowatt maximum DC quick charge, it is going to take a while. It kind of defaults to around 40 kilowatts at its best, and then that drops down to about 30 as the battery fills up. A lot of people ask why that is. It's just because the battery's so small.
Yeah.
The smaller the battery, the lower the current.
Yeah, well, you've got that very short period where the battery is reasonably empty and can take the charge quite quickly, and then you're up to a point where it's fairly full, and that charging is gonna back off because it's gonna start getting hot, and it's harder to push those electrons in as the battery gets fuller.
Right, because the smaller a battery, the smaller capacity a battery, the fewer cells are in parallel in the pack, which means the current has to drop more quickly. You know, Kate, it's funny, I often get to a point where I'm reviewing a car, I get a car and I'm driving it for a bit, and I can pretty much guess what you're going to say. I think the only time that you and I have disagreed on a car was when it was the F-150 Lightning, and obviously I'm biased because I own one, but the rest of the time you and I have got behind the wheel of successive cars, and we've always had a very similar opinion of them, and I think you and I are in lockstep again with this car.
I think we are. It's a little overpriced, but it's a damn good car.
It's a pocket rocket for people who want to live life at 100 miles of fun per go. MINI Cooper S.E. We're here in Scappoose outside Cathedral Coffee, so thanks to them for letting us film. We purposely chose today's route to be a short route because this has got a short range.
It has. It is very definitely a city car.
On paper, it's 114 miles. In the US, on the EPA test cycle, which is what? Maybe 170, 180 kilometers. In Europe, it's rated at over 200 kilometers, but I call bovine byproduct on that.
Yeah, I mean, we can see how very, very generous the WLTP range is. We've always said, 60, well, more like 80%. And that is realistically what you get.
Because look, this is a very different car, and I feel like I need to just put this in blinking lights on this review. We gave Mazda a really terrible time for the MX-30, a car that has basically the same real world range as this.
Yes.
And has similar 50 kilowatt maximum CCS quick charging.
Yes.
On paper, I would suggest that the MX-30 probably has a little bit larger load capacity than the Mini.
Yeah, I think it probably does.
Slightly larger. But the difference between those two cars is that the MX-30 drove terribly.
Yes. The MX-30 is trying to use its electronics to overcome a physics problem. The weight distribution is wrong in that car, and it's trying to use stability control, it's trying to use its traction control to overcome it and keep it on the road.
If you are going to be driving a car that only has a 100-mile real-world range, you want it to be fun. You want it to be exciting. This weekend, when I had the Mini, I didn't take my car at all anywhere. I took the Mini everywhere. The only time I took one of my cars was when I had to take the truck to go and get some groceries, because I'd been working in the garden and working in the wood shop and working in the yard, and I was covered from head to toe in sawdust, garden muck, and all of these other things, and I didn't have time to jump in the shower, and I didn't want to get the press car dirty. But that was the only excuse that I didn't take that car. You've driven it for a very short period of time because you don't have... We live more than 100 miles apart. Let's leave it at that.
We do, and to get the car there and back would be fine, except that we need it charged to do a review.
And I know that a lot of people watching this will then turn that around and go, well, clearly that car doesn't have enough range. Clearly that car is pointless. Clearly that car is a compliance car. In fact, I don't think Michael will mind. He said that this week. It's a compliance car. And we actually turned around and said, no, it's just a very small ranged EV. The MX-30 was definitely a compliance car because it was a vehicle that was designed to be sold in a limited number of states, had very, very minimal capabilities, and was just so poorly executed.
But not all compliance cars are that bad.
True.
I mean, so, and this is one of the reasons I feel like I can say with certainty, this is a car that you could live with in the right circumstances, and it would be fun. Because London, well, even so, we have a 2015 Kia Soul EV, which is a compliance car. It absolutely is squarely in that camp.
Yes, it is, yeah.
Limited market. It's made from the gas version with bits crammed in, and you can see they really shoehorned them in. Mm-hmm. And it is a vehicle that my wife drives as a daily driver. But the Soul, in winter, it gets maybe 70 miles of range. And it has nearly 100,000 miles on the clock. So it is a slightly tired compliance car, and it is fine. She rarely takes it below 50%.
Where that falls down is the price.
Yes.
Starting price of 34 grand for a 100-mile EV is a bit of an excuse. And again, I really criticised Mazda for that.
And I agree with this.
Yeah, and the difference is this is a higher-end luxury car, and it feels like you've spent 34 grand, as opposed to the MX-30, which didn't.
I still think that price is a little high. I know you're playing the brand price because it's a Mini, and Mini has become a lifestyle brand. It's become very much a sort of not quite premium but semi-premium brand, and you're paying that extra cost because you want a car which says Mini on the front.
It's not a practical vehicle for practical sake. It's a fun vehicle for fun's sake.
Yes.
And that's the differentiation. But I'll tell you this. Not only did I find every excuse I possibly could to take it out and drive it, but every time I got behind the wheel, I had a massive grin on my face. I found myself reaching the speed limit very quickly. I found myself going round corners briskly, and the car gave me that feedback. You know exactly where the wheels are, you know exactly what it is doing, and while the steering is twitchy and I would like it to be dialed back a little bit, it feels like it's a car that was actually driven around a test track and calibrated and finalized before they rolled it out. And I think that reiterates how BMW has been with its EVs to date. The i3 didn't happen until BMW had made two very competent electric vehicles.
Yeah. They think these things through. They take the time to develop it. They have a history of building cars that are drivers' cars.
Mini is a brand that isn't as popular in America as it is in Europe. And I hope that it doesn't go the way of, say, the Fiat brand or the smart car brand. and just end up morphing into SUVs and maybe making a 200-mile electric SUV that is just like every other 200-mile electric SUV with a BMW premium price stuck on. But like I say, this is not necessarily an American market car.
No, it's a European market car that they're happy to sell in the States because it has some niche appeal.
Who is the target buyer?
Dinky.
Yes, dual income, no kids.
Yeah, it is for someone living in a city, well off.
So, a young professional.
Young professional who has a lot of friends and connections in that city, doesn't go outside the city a lot, and when they do, they probably fly to somewhere far away where their friends live.
Or, you know, BMW still, I believe, BMW in Europe still does a car club. Mm-hmm. So if you have a BMW electric vehicle and you want to do long distance trips, you just borrow an iX for the weekend or a whatever else is available. And for that, I think that would be a good car. The problem becomes, if you live in a city like London, do you really want to own a car at all? Should you be cycling? Should you be taking micromobility or the tube or something else? So I think contextualizing where this car fits is really super important. Do you think Sir Alec would be impressed?
I think he'd be very upset. I've maintained this since the Mini was redesigned in 2000-ish, in that the whole point of the Mini was the maximum interior volume in the minimum external space. There's safety requirements that make that much more difficult now, but I think he would look at that and be like, apart from anything else, it's electric. You could make so much more space in there because it has an electric drivetrain if it was designed around an electric drivetrain.
That's it for today and the review. If you like the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to leave your thoughts below or in our free to join Discord chat room. There are links in the video description, and if you really like today's video, why not leave us a super thanks? It's easy to do and everything you do send goes towards helping us make great content. If you haven't already, make sure you've subscribed to this channel and our other channel, Transport Evolved Take 2, which has more behind the scenes stuff and maybe a few outtakes, eh?
Maybe.
And give the bell a ring to make sure you're told when our next video goes live. And before I go, two things. Thank you to Cathedral Coffee here in Scappoose for letting us film outside. And second, make sure that you check out our regular sponsors at Unspun and Energy Sage. Links below. And if you are shopping for the holidays, also check out U-Gears. We are working with them at the moment on some amazing wooden mechanical models. If you use any of those companies and their relevant codes, which will be listed below, you'll be helping the channel out too. Thanks on behalf of the entire crew go out to everyone who makes this channel possible. That includes everyone who supports us on Patreon and YouTube, as well as those of you who just watch the video and share it.
If you're a supporter at the charged up level, you'll see your name right here on my right. And if you just joined, we're sorry if your name isn't showing. We currently render the list out every week or so, but sometimes our videos are produced a few weeks in advance. Thanks to our self-driving tier supporters, Mike Weeder, Patrick Boyarski, Chris Maxwell, Brian Newton, Michael Goad, Bennett Elder, Andrew Martin, Pedro Muro Pinheiro, Brophy Wolf, Chris and Michael Johnson, Tesla in the Gong, Dan Blair, Peter Dillinger, Gordon C, Stephen O'Donoghue, Kyle Hodgson, Anthony Coates, Regine Fellows, Denny Hyde, Chris Ascenta, and Jim Burness. And of course, out of this world, thanks to our Starman supporters, Andrew Glenn, Anonymous Freak, JP Fagerback, Joe Bresney, John Lyons, Rory Litwin, Kevin Burrowbridge, Laura Reynolds, Marcel Ward, Matthew Drobnak, Paul Conway, Reggie Watts, Will Graylan, and, of course, Ian!
If, like that train, you would like to be part of that amazing list, you can join Patreon at the link below, hit the join button to support us on YouTube, or you can show us your support through Bitcoin, Ko-fi, or our cool swag store. There are links below. And if you are unable to support us financially, just know that watching the video and sharing it really makes a huge difference to how well our videos perform. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for putting up with the train and everything else in the background. And as always, keep evolving.